It was conference time in October in Salt Lake, and Brigham Young was standing at the pulpit in the Salt Lake Temple, and he delivered a sermon on service. He knew that the saints were out on the plains, and you know the quote, we've got saints out there, go bring them in from the plains, is the quote. But a half hour before he said any of that, he stood up and talked about giving service, essentially ministering. And he concludes his remarks by saying, if you don't follow the principles that I'm now teaching, this service, ministering, he says, you won't find yourself in the celestial kingdom of God. And then he announced, brothers and sisters, we have saints, fellow saints that are stuck out on the plains. We need to go bring them in from the plains. He cancels the rest of General Conference. Well, I'd love to spend an hour telling you all about the rescue, but let's focus just here on Redick Allred tonight. And Redick Allred was one of those who volunteered to go out on the plains, risking his own life. It was really a suicide mission, but he went anyway at the call in response to the call of the prophet, and he went out to potentially sacrifice himself in hopes of rescuing some and bringing them in off the plains. Well, Redick Allred heads out there, and what Brigham did is so smart. He set up these stations along the trail so that when Willie, he was a few days ahead of Martin, when Willie would come to one of the stations, they'd get resupplied, rejuvenated, get their supplies to make it to the next supply station. And Redick Allred was in charge of one of these supply stations. And the name of, at least the location of his station was South Pass. So he was there, ready to go. They had brought wagons with him. He had all the provisions necessary to help Willie and then to help Martin as they passed through South Pass. Well, he gets out to South Pass on October 19th, 1856. And he's ready to go. He's got a company of men with him, and they're ready to help out. Well, the Willie Handcart Company, ahead of Martin, they come up over Rocky Ridge into Rock Creek Hollow. They receive some assistance from these rescuers at that location, and then the design was to continue on to South Pass where the rest of the provisions were, and then heads on to Salt Lake. Redick Allred was part of that rescue at Rock Creek Hollow, bringing the provisions into the Willie Handcart Company. He goes back to South Pass, and he waits. And the men are waiting with him, but they start to become a little anxious. They saw the horrific conditions that Willie's Handcart Company was in. They buried 13 in one grave, in a common grave, and 2 in another common grave there at Rock Creek Hollow. And they knew that the things were only getting worse. Well, so they're starting to speculate about Martin. They can't find Martin. The rescuers on horseback are out there searching. They can't find Martin. So these guys that are sitting there with Redick Allred at this station, they start to discuss among themselves, what do we do? And they conclude that, or before they conclude, they ask Redick, why don't you pray? You're the leader of this group. Why don't you pray and ask the Lord what we should do? And Redick Allred said, no, I'm not praying. I've already been told by a prophet of God what to do. Brigham Young said to bring the supplies to South Pass and wait for the company. And that's what I'm doing. Well, the men didn't like that. They discussed among themselves and concluded either Martin's company has all perished, every single one of them, they're all dead, or all of us are going to die while waiting for them. So with that conclusion, everyone except Redick headed back towards Salt Lake. As they're going back to Salt Lake, wagon loads of supplies and men and needed help, were coming east from Salt Lake. Well, this group of men who had been with Redick and now they're heading back to Salt Lake, they tell those wagons, hey, everybody's dead, and if they're not, they're going to be soon, and so will you if you don't go back to Salt Lake with us. Those guys who gave up at South Pass turned around 77 wagons, rescue wagons, that were coming out to help Martin. They all started heading back to Salt Lake. Brigham got word of what was going on, And his words were these. He says, you tell those 77 Teamsters that they turn around so fast that it breaks all their necks. He was serious, and he was upset. Well, a lot of the men still went back to Salt Lake. Before any of those wagons made it back to Redick Allred in South Pass, finally, the Martin Company arrives. They don't arrive at South Pass until November 19th. This had been almost a month between the Willie handcart rescue at South Pass and the time that Martin's company gets there. Reddick had understood that Martin was only 3 or 4, maybe 5 days behind. A month goes by, and what does Reddick do? He sits there and doesn't move a muscle. Why? Because the prophet of God said, you go to South Pass and you wait. So he waited. Now, what did he wait through? Horrific storms. He was freezing cold constantly, even though all the supplies were there. They were saved and set apart, consecrated for the Martin Company. He left it alone. He starved, even though there was food around him. It was for the Martin Company. He contracted dysentery. He was incredibly sick. And he left the supplies alone because it was for the Martin Company. The Martin Company finally arrives a month later. And the thing that saved the Martin Company from perishing, every single one of them, was the faith and diligence and obedience of Redick Allred. Many testified in the Martin Company that had Redick Allred not been there, they said in their journals, many of them, we all would have died. We all would have perished. We couldn't have made it a single day further than South Pass. So it was Redick Allred, his credit, really the credit of his obedience and his faith. Let me give you a quote from President Eyring talking about Redick Allred. He said this in General Conference. Those with the faith of Redick Allred will keep offering friendship, even when it seems not to be needed or to have no effect. They will persist. When someone reaches the point of spiritual exhaustion, they will be there offering kind words and fellowship. They will then feel the same divine approval Brother Allred felt when he saw those handcart pioneers struggling towards him, knowing he could offer them safety because he had followed counsel when it was hard to do. Captain Grant, he was in charge of all the rescuers. He was bringing up the rear of the Martin Company. He comes into South Pass, and to his surprise and shock, there's Redick Allred, ready with all the supplies to save them, to bring in the saints. And you know what Captain Grant says? He yells out, "Hurrah for the Bulldog! Way to keep hanging on. Hurrah for the Bulldog. Way to keep hanging on."